All right, Sarah. So as you know, we are doing conversations, which is really just. I know this is a little weird because I have to do this spiel, but conversation just a chance to get to talk to you. And honestly, if it makes you feel better, I actually just enjoy hearing your story. So, regardless of how this goes, I'm gonna get to know your heart more, and I've learned a lot from people's stories, so I'm excited to do that. So, to begin with, you want to tell us just briefly, kind of about your background in church, family, anything like that that you want people to know.
Yeah, I grew up. I was homeschooled my whole life. I have seven siblings. I grew up in church. Like I don't remember not ever going to church. Like I remember when I was 6 or 7, going to a lot of different churches. I remember going to like my grandparents' church. I remember going to like a church with some friends. And then I was 6. We found our church, and I remember I remember being really mad because we had to leave because my little sister was crying. That's a really random memory, but that's what I remember. But we stayed. We kept going. And I was there for, oh gosh, let's see, I started when I was 6 and stopped going when I was around 19. So I've pretty much
So
been in
you're in the
church.
same church for 13 years.
Yeah.
And those were pretty formative years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So so you've always been, as long as you can remember, a believer, a Christian. Your family's Christian. You were raised in a really conservative home. Tell us like some of the pros and cons to that, to being homeschooled, because I think that's something that's really neat about you is like you've been really honest about the benefits of that and some of the challenges with that.
I think some of the challenges is that sometimes I like don't know how to like if people who like for work, for example, when people come with me with like they try and challenge me, sometimes I don't know quite how to give answers because I'm like for me I just know, like I know what I know and I just
You're
don't.
talking about with your faith.
Yeah, with my faith, like I just don't like for me I'm like, oh, this is what I know, this is it. Like I never have had any doubt about that. Like this is what is real. And when people question that, my brain sometimes doesn't understand because I don't. I've my family has taught me that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's also really cool because then I don't have any remembrance of like never knowing who God is.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, like God's real. I've never had any doubts. Like this God is real. That's who He is. Mm-hmm. And I think I know that's not always the case with people that were raised Christians, but for me, God's real.
What about, when you combine that with, were there any challenges with being homeschooled versus not? Or what are the pros and cons to that? Because I think that really makes up who you are. I don't think people, let me put it this way. I think if people met you, people have a preconceived notion sometimes of homeschool. I don't think they would think that with you. So it's kind of neat. We just talked about this earlier today where I said you're one of the people who's really good with people still, but also I can see the benefits of being homeschooled. Mm-hmm. But I'm sure there were challenges too.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge was that a lot of the people, like from my church when I was growing up, they would have been most of my friends. They all viewed me as a weirdo. Like, she's homeschooled, she has all
even
these
your
siblings.
Church friends?
Yeah, so I didn't really have any church friends. And, like, I was either helping out with my siblings or I was hanging out with the adults because I preferred hanging out with the adults over the teens. So I felt kind of excluded from a lot of stuff.
Do you remember that being hurtful at all, or were there times when you felt that, or was it pretty like because you hung out with your parent or your with adults and were helping out, you never really noticed that?
I honestly did. Like looking back now, I can see times I was like, oh, that's kind of hurtful. Oh, that wasn't really a good friend. Why did I hang out with them? But like at the time, I don't really remember. Like I remember some things being weird. I was oh, I feel like I should be included in this, but I'm not. Mm. But other than that, I don't think I was ever really hurt.
Probably partially awesome to have 6 or 7 friends while you're living 2 at home. Like
yes.
You got a whole crowd with you. So a lot of people, in case they don't know, most people here at the church know you got married fairly recently, which was when?
November.
It honestly seems like way longer than that.
It's weird.
So going back, you're married now, one of my dear friends, and you guys came from, really couldn't have picked 2 more opposite backgrounds.
It's true.
Which it could be a whole conversation in itself. But I think what I want to kind of talk about, if you're okay focusing on, is so being homeschooled, growing up in church, by your own admission, you didn't have a lot of outside friends in church, at least. Relationships. So growing up at 6, so that means you're going through becoming an adult, right? That teenage time when you start having those feelings and all those kinds of things. What was that like? What was it like to start, I don't know, relationally with boys and all that kind of thing? Do you remember when that became a tension?
I do, because my parents were very much everyone in the church was like, oh, your parents are strict. Your parents are too strict. And to an extent, they were. Like, there was a little bit of both. But I wasn't allowed to be friends with boys, which obviously then I wanted to be friends with boys. I wanted to do everything my parents said not to do.
Mm.
So Jason was my first official boyfriend, but from the time I was 10 to the time I was 15, I had the same crush on this guy. And it was a whole big ordeal when I was like 12, which is so like dumb to think back on now. Like I was literally 12 and we both were like, oh, we like each other. And then I was like, wait, this is dumb. I can't date you. So it was like all really stupid.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of it was because my parents were so, you can't be friends with boys, you can't be friends with boys, that I was like, well, why not? Like, I want to be friends with boys. And I don't think that was okay for them to do. I do think it helped me not to date anybody and not to, like...
Protected you in a
yeah,
way.
Because I didn't, like, when I was 16, I went to camp for the first time. And that's when, like, boys and girls were interacting in a healthy way. And I was just like, I don't ever get this. Like, why? And so I ended up with a couple of really close friends that I eventually got in trouble for having. Because my parents were so against me having friends who were guys. And I don't think they really... I think they were trying to protect me, but in a way I was just like, but I want them. I want these friendships. Like, one of them I'm still friends with. And so I think that kind of sucked. Because then I was curious, because I didn't know anything. I didn't know how to be friends with boys. I didn't know anything about anything relationally. Like, when it came to, like, with a guy. Like, I didn't know. Like, my parents were very... My mom did not tell me... didn't have to talk with me till I was 16. And by that point in time, I had found out things about myself because I wanted to know, because she wouldn't tell me.
So that's a really honest thing. So do you remember the first time, and maybe you don't, but do you remember the time or around when you started, because you said, I wanted to know. Do you remember when you started wanting to know? Like, was there a moment when you're like, okay, you know?
I was probably around 14.
Do you remember was there a moment that kind of kickstarted that, or was it just, it's hard to know, sort of a slow...
I think the one thing that I really remember was probably a book.
Mm.
Like, they said something and I tried to bring it to Mom, and she just kind of, like, brushed it off, and I'm like, well, what does that mean? Like, what is that?
Because
No, wait, I remember, it was the Bible.
Yeah?
She asked me, because I asked, talking about the Virgin Mary, and I was like, what does it mean to be a virgin? And Mom was like, oh, it means she's never slept with a guy before, and I was like, well, what does that mean? And she wouldn't tell me. And I'm like, well, I don't understand what it means then. Like, I don't get it. So then I started doing my own research and...
How did you research it?
Internet.
So it probably started out, and this is something that I really want to... First of all, I think what we're about to talk about is so common. And what I love about your willingness, because we talked briefly before, is that you're going to... It's such a common thing, but I think for women, it's not as common to talk about. And that makes me sad, because I think there's a lot of women that are trapped by their own shame and their own guilt or whatnot. So just want you to know how thankful I am. And you know, before we started, you said, we kind of talk about, hey, where you want to head in this conversation. You've got, God's worked in your life in various ways throughout your life. And you said, I feel like he's leading me to do this, and I don't want to. So that's pretty cool. So just want to tell you I appreciate that. So moving in, you said you started researching. And that opened a door, I would imagine. Because I would imagine when you first did it, was probably more innocent. You're researching on the internet, I assume. You're researching, what does this mean? Which leads to, and you want to kind of take us through that process. And
so I remember, like, looking that up. Like, I pretty much got the same answer, like, the internet, like, what is a virgin? Like, I think it pretty much just gives kind of the same thing my mom said. And I eventually started reading more books that I probably shouldn't have when I was, like, 14, 15. And I remember stopping.
And these were books with, like, more explicit scenes and things like that.
Yes, these were not, like, I read specifically Christian up until I was, like, 14, 15. And then around one of those times, I was given a Nook, an e-reader, and they, you can do free books a lot of times, and a lot of, you can find sections that are not appropriate. And I remember I would read those all the time to try and give me answers.
Now, were these books, did they start when you kind of look at this journey that we're about to go on in this part of your life? Was it started kind of like, okay, these were like, maybe these were fantasy romance novels that would have sections that were really explicit, and then it kind of got more from that? Because I guess what I'm saying is I've noticed that a lot of times, and we'll get into this a little later, particularly with ladies, I think they go down this rabbit trail differently than men, because I've heard over and over it starts with books. And I'm just curious what kind of books.
So for me, I wanted I wanted details, but but in my brain I was like, okay, well, what's porn and what's not? Like, I remember thinking this, like, what's porn and what's not? It's like, I can't watch videos. I can't do that because that's not okay. But these books, I can. And I don't know why I decided, like, for me, like, that was my okay. Like, my okay was, these books are okay. These are not okay. So I remember that, and I remember looking, like, I would get the books that were, like, romance, but I wouldn't, like, because I know, like, I've heard a lot of girls talk about, like, oh, they just wanted, like, they wanted the romance and they liked the sex scenes that were in it. But for me, I wanted just that because I was curious and I wanted to know. And I was
So
like,
you kind of
what does
skip
this
through to
mean?
find those even?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so that's what I did a lot. Or I'd find, like, they would have short books, like 25 pages. They were literally just those. So that's a lot of what I did when I was, like, 14, 15.
So even when you started there, would you have, you know, I guess I'll let you continue. So where did that lead?
It led, I would probably around 15, 16, it led to YouTube. Like, definitely, it led toward that. Like, it led to just searching up scenes and stuff like that. And then I finally realized, I was like, this isn't okay. And I stopped for a long time. Like, I put away my Nook. I went just back to reading Christian books.
Now, were you able to share with anyone? Did you share with anyone that you had
No.
already started down that trail, and why not?
No. I didn't feel like I had anybody. Like, I remember I wanted to talk to my mom. Literally the day that I wanted to talk to my mom, she went on a rant about this guy who'd been caught watching porn and his wife and him divorced because he ended up cheating on his wife. Like, literally that day. And she went on this big long rant. And I was like, I can't tell my mom this. I was like, I can't tell my mom any of this.
And what about church? Like, that you didn't feel like you had a place to share that at church either? Or was there shame involved already? Or
Though there was a lot of shame. There was a lot of, because, like, my dad would, like, they would definitely, like, try to talk to me about things, like, but I was like, no, I can't. They can't know this. Like, because no one talked about it, ever. And, like, when they did, it was always directed toward men. So I was like, well, this is it. No other girl does this. This sucks. I don't know who to talk to. I don't have.
So what kind of words, even at this point, because that was really powerful, you said only men do this. So what did that make you feel like? What kind of thoughts went through your head? Well, if only men are doing this, then that makes me what?
I felt very dirty.
Yeah.
I felt very gross. I felt just awful all the time. I felt very sad. And I didn't know, like, for me, I'd put so much worth in, I'm going to save myself for marriage, that I felt like I'd ruined it by doing this. And this was at the very beginning before I even went down worse paths.
Sure. So well, thanks for sharing it. So you're there, you kind of feel lost, you don't have no one to talk to really, but you're battling it. There's a part of you that knows, you got the Holy Spirit, it's like, hey, let's not do this, but at the same time, you don't have anyone to share with. So then what happens? What turns you back to that, or do you remember when you're like, you know what, I'm going to go back?
For me, it was definitely an off and on thing. Like, it'd be good for a month, and then there'd be a weekend, and I'd mess up. And for me, it was always that. I was like, dang it, I messed up. I ruined this. I have to start over.
Yeah.
And it was always that path. When I was 16, so this is kind of, like, I think about this, would have been 2014, kind of start, beginning of the year, my dog died. And it was, I remember this year as my defining, like, this was my awful, it was an awful year. I just started the year my dog died, and I took it really, really hard. Like, I didn't know, like, this was the dog I'd had since I was 8, and she wasn't supposed to die. The vet literally said, she won't die from this, and she died. And I was so mad, and I was really sad. And that I started to, eventually by this point, I don't remember when it happened, but I eventually did start watching just straight porn. I was, it was a numbing thing. Like, it numbed everything. Yeah. And then I wasn't sad. I was sad, but I just hid it. And then that summer actually ended up being really good for me because I went to camp for the first time, and that's when I met a lot of my friends. And that was awesome. But then I came, like, the thing about camp is that it's really awesome because you're like, yes, God, like, I'm going to go for this. But then I come home, and then I have nothing. Yeah. And I didn't have, like, I think at this point in time, I kind of went to youth group a little bit, but not a lot. I still didn't have a lot of friends.
Why didn't you go to youth group?
Why didn't I? My parents wouldn't let me.
Why?
There was boys. Yeah, so, yeah.
So you go to camp, you come back. Now at camp, you still haven't talked to anyone about this struggle, I assume, or did you at this point?
I feel like my first year at camp, I shared with a counselor.
Did that just feel so freeing?
It did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did they respond well?
Yeah, they
Good.
responded. They prayed with me. But the thing, so normally when you go to the camp that I went to, at least, your youth pastor was your counselor. But I never had a youth pastor go with me. So it was just a stranger who didn't keep in touch with me.
Mm.
So then I started this cycle again when I came home. And I started getting really close to my pastor and his wife. And then that fall, they left. They left our church. Like, not for a bad reason. Like, for family reasons. They
Sure.
moved. And I was like, I was so close to needing to share with them, like, about stuff. And, like, I'd gotten really close to my pastor's wife, and then they left. In October of that year, my grandma passed. And it was really hard. No one was helping me with anything by that point. I didn't feel like I could talk to anybody. And definitely I realized to that point that anything to do with porn, like, it was out of control. I couldn't stop anything. It was a constant daily thing that I hid from my parents. Like, I don't know if my parents were just oblivious, if they knew but didn't know what to do. Like, I don't understand how they realized that I was in such a bad place and didn't do anything about it. Because I was so just ashamed and lost, and I didn't know what to do about anything. Like, I knew I needed to stop, and it's like a really weird thing, like, because I knew I needed to stop, but literally before I would even open my phone, I'm like, Sierra, you shouldn't do this, but I'd still do it. And now that I've done a lot of research and I know things, I know that affects things in your brain, and I know that, like, honestly, porn isn't any different than drugs. Like, it's that same, do it for the same thing.
Dopamine,
you want,
all those things.
yeah, you want that feel good. You want to be numb. And, because that's afterward, it was just a numb, and it felt good, but then it immediately was, like, I literally could feel, like, just shame wash over me. And it is awful. It was an awful feeling.
Yeah. I think, so when you said, I think, well, first of all, thank you. That's so honest. And when you said, it was interesting. A couple of things jumped to mind. One, you talked about this cycle. And anyone that has been in pornography that is a Christian, I think, can empathize with this cycle. So you go, whatever your record is, you go a week and you're good. And then you mess up and you said, I ruined it all, right? And then I've got to start all over again. It's such a powerful statement. I got to start all over again. And so you feel like, and you tell me if I'm wrong, did it feel like, okay, I'm going to hold out, and then as soon as I did that, I'm complete failure again. So the picture you're kind of painting is you're in this daily struggle. You're lost. You're deep into this. It's like a drug. You had to have felt, did you feel alone? I mean, in all of this? Like, did it feel like you were living two lives almost to yourself, what you were sharing others? And, what were you feeling inside at this time? You said it was an awful feeling.
I definitely felt really alone, because I tried, like, to share with people, like, I'm not sure, because so at that time when I was 16, like, right after my grandma died, I hadn't really shared with anybody besides, like, counselor at camp. But, like, the one thing that was hard about camp was that they didn't talk about, like, a relapse. Like, for them, they, like, prayed for me, and they're like, don't do this anymore. But, like, they didn't really give, like, help with that. So I definitely felt like I messed up. I ruined this. Like, I can't, like, what do I even do? I prayed for forgiveness all the time. I was just like, God, I'm so tired of feeling, because I felt, because when I was in that cycle, like, I'd be in my room, I'd be sad, and I'd be lonely, but then the next day, I'd have to put on a face. And so I definitely felt like I was living two lives all the time. Because by this point, especially after my grandma died, anytime I was sad or lonely, that was my go-to, was that. Like, it wasn't anything else but that. And so I think the summer after, I was able to share with my youth pastor, who I'd gotten really close with. I was able to share with her, and she actually had a similar struggle. And she had gotten out of it, and it was something that was helpful to actually be able to talk to somebody who's like, I've been there, I get it. But I still felt very alone, because she never talked to me about it after I told her. Like, occasionally, like, maybe once a month, she might bring it up, but she wasn't, like, there pushing me, like, constantly. Like, even though I saw her 4 days a week, it was just kind of like, oh, hey, how are you doing? And so that made me feel even more alone. Like, hey, this person knows what I'm going through, and she's not doing anything about it.
Well, in some ways, it can almost feel lonelier. Like, hey, I need help, Okay, that's great, and then send you on your way. I want to come back to that, but real quick, if you were to say, looking back on it, or how did that affect your relationship with God? How did that affect, you know, your faith?
I felt like I disappointed him. Um, because it was such a weird cycle. Because I was praying all the time that God, I can't get rid of this. Like, help me, please forgive me. And it definitely was a very weird like relationship on my end. Like, because I still prayed, I still went to church, I still was fighting, but I definitely felt like I was losing.
Mm,
So I definitely just felt first word that comes to mind is worthless.
mm,
Um,
mm,
and I felt like a failure because I couldn't keep like I kept saying I didn't want to do it and I kept doing it.
mm,
And so that was definitely a really hard thing.
mm.
And then I
Yeah,
felt like I disappointed my father. Like that's why I didn't tell my earthly dad because I knew he would be really disappointed. So then to know that my heavenly dad was definitely disappointed in me was hard. Or in my brain was really disappointed in me.
yeah. Did that ever make you doubt your fate, your salvation? Were there moments where you're afraid of that? I know sometimes that fear can come into people. Or are you pretty secure in that area?
I don't I don't feel like it ever did. Like
That's awesome.
I just felt like more like he was
Disappointed,
disappointed.
sure. So when you say these people would kind of come in your life, looking back, what do you think your heart really wanted them to? What did you want? What did your heart long for these? You know, you shared with your youth pastor, you shared with these people. What did you wish they would have done?
I wish they would have been more direct. Like I wish people would have been like, "Why did you do this?" Or like would have been more like actually I told my best friend and she was really good about she had no idea what I was going through, but she would send me a Bible verse every day because it's the only thing she knew how to do, and that something was helpful because even though she didn't know how to help me, she was doing something, and so I think that's something that I wanted like with my youth pastor. Like I'd found an app that helped. I could track. I think it helped and it hindered because I could track
When?
like when I messed up, but it would send her a report, and then she could get back with me and be like, "Hey, what happened? What was wrong?" But she only did that like twice, and then I finally just stopped keeping up with it. So I just wish I would have had a little more accountability. Like she would, even if she couldn't keep me accountable to doing it, like at least like filling out the calendar thing, at least keep me accountable to that. And then she would come and be like, "Hey, what happened? What was wrong?"
Was the accountability part more of like no thinking I'm not in this battle alone. Somebody's here with me.
Yes,
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah. Yeah, and I think that's the thing with pornography and sexual sin in general within the church is that it can make us feel, it's this secret that we know people struggle with, but because we don't talk about it, we feel so alone in it. And I don't love that you felt this way, but I love that you shared it because I think that's so true. You said, I felt worthless. I felt alone. I felt like if dirty. I felt like these people, I was the only one doing it because that's the lie you can feel. I'm the only one because everyone else is smiling and happy, but they all have masks on too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether they're struggling with that or something else. So, um, what's looking back, where did the turning point come to where you started at least not feeling trapped in the cycle as much?
Um, I guess for me, it would have been I kind of traded it for something worse as I started keeping myself busy because that's what I took information that I had learned and I used it, but not for the best way because they did say keep busy, but they meant more like, okay, if you feel like that, go journal, go on a walk. But for me, I ended up, oh gosh, I would have been 18. I ended up working two jobs. Literally went from one job to the other, slept one job to the other, slept one job to the other. And
Mm,
by the end of the one was just a seasonal job, I ended up working 70 hours a week.
mm,
And so I just traded it for busyness and I
mm.
didn't really deal with it because anytime I was free, I was right back to it.
They'd just be waiting for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was really hard because I was just like, I would be like, I'm finally out of this. And then next thing I know, no, I was just too busy to even think about it. And so then I was just like, I'm never going to get out of this ever. Like, I'm just always stuck there.
Mm,
And I remember, would have been 2018, 8 months I went without. And I was actually finally like, this is, like, I feel amazing. And then I stumbled again. And I was like, God, I'm so tired of feeling like this. And I didn't know what to do. And being here at the Remnant helped a lot because I was able to, I think it was last year, all the women in the church share their stories. And at first I didn't want to talk about it at all. I was like, I'm going to leave this out. And I was like, how can I tell my story and not talk about this? And I think that helped me because then I had a couple women come to me like, I get it, I struggled with this. And I was like, this isn't like other women have struggled with this.
I'm not a monster. I'm not, yeah.
And then when Jason and I first started dating, we were a week into dating. And I was like, God was literally like, you need to tell him. And I was like, I'm not going to tell him. He goes, and like, I remember for 2 or 3 days, like, we'd literally been dating a week. No, we'd been dating a couple of days, and God was like, you have to tell him. And I was like, I want to wait. And God's like, you have to tell him. And I was like, I don't want to tell him. I want to wait. I told him, and I don't know what I was expecting, but his response, he was just like, it's okay. He's like, we'll get through this. We'll fight it together. And I was just like, okay.
Makes me want to cry. It's just so powerful. Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. And so I want to touch base on some of the effects, and then I want to focus on sort of the positive stuff because I see that and I know. And you've been really honest. I do think this is one of those things that you can't have freedom from, but it's certainly hard. And like freedom is probably different than people think sometimes. Freedom doesn't mean never stumbling again. It means there's a change in that pattern, right?
Yes.
And knowing your identity. So one thing I want to touch base on, and we haven't talked about this, so it may take 2 seconds, or maybe. Do you think you're married now?
Mm-hmm.
And you had, despite all your struggles, you had waited till marriage.
Yes.
And so, do you, looking in these first few months, do you see that pornography had an effect on that part of your life, or when you were married? Were there expectations that were like set up by the stuff that weren't realistic? Did it affect, looking back? If you feel comfortable sharing.
Yeah. I think I expected to affect it, but it didn't. It definitely and I was very thankful for that because I'd been trapped in this for pretty much from the time I was 14 until almost 19, 20. So I expected it to, and it really didn't. I expected, to even feel dirty because for me, anything sexual was associated with porn, which was associated with shame. So I expected, sex was going to associate with shame. Because that's what I was really afraid of. Because I've heard stories of girls who have struggled with that and then have had sex and just felt shame because it's dirty.
Yeah.
Because porn is dirty, makes us feel dirty. And it didn't, and I was really thankful for that because I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do if, this makes me feel this way. What am I supposed to do? And thankfully, it hasn't at all.
That's such a cool, awesome little blessing from God. So I guess earlier you said it made you feel like you were letting him down, all those types of things. Where was the shift in your faith? What do you remember a time, whether it was in 2018, whether it was when you shared where you said, maybe it was even the response of Jason, where you started seeing that God's view of you wasn't what you felt in those moments, even in the failure. That God, what is there anything you can speak into with that?
Chosen by grace.
Yeah.
Would have been the biggest, I'm going to start crying.
That makes 2 of us. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome. Would have been the biggest thing, that no matter how much I mess up, God's going to be there, and, I don't have to be stuck in that. And that has changed me more than I was ever thought it was going to. Because no one talked about it, no one was there, and, I felt like I needed to, I needed to feel ashamed. That's how I felt, constantly was, I had to be ashamed of it because it was wrong. And then I realized that I didn't. God's grace was supposed to, I didn't need to live in that shame. I didn't need to live in that. Because even though, I messed up and it's a sin, I can start over. And it's not that I slid back to the beginning. I just get to start over right where I'm at. I don't have to go all the way back to the first square. And I think that's really, that was one of the turning points.
Yeah. Oh, just acting up in here. If you were to, so to kind of close up here, if you were to say, I think there's 2 different people to talk to here. What would you say to someone who has a friend that's going through this? How could they support them? What's the best way they can support them?
Literally ask them how they're doing. And, I've literally done people. I've asked people like, "Hey, how are you doing?" "Oh, good. How are you?" "No. How are you doing?" And they'll give another answer. And like I've had to be. You just have to be direct. Like you can't say, "How are you doing?" and expect them to share their heart. Like if a friend, like even if I told them their struggle, they say, "Oh, how are you doing?" I'm gonna be like, "Oh, I kind of sucky. I messed up last night." Like I'm not gonna just go in and say that. Like.
Because you're already struggling with that. You need people to enter into your life.
Mm-hmm.
So your advice is like really be willing to enter into that.
Yeah.
So if someone comes and confesses that to you, be prepared to like battle it with them. And then what would you say to someone who was where you were and is feeling worthless? And you can say that to them if you want, worthless or not good enough or shame. What would you want to say to them?
I guess sometimes I still struggle like with that, like, and I think it's to like remind yourself of God's truth. Like for me, the biggest thing, actually, that's pretty much what it is, priceless. Like that's my word. That's like what I remember, and like I remember reading something that's like wear something that reminds you of something good. And so I actually had a necklace that for King Country, this band that sings this song that I wore all the time, and it was to remind yourself that you're priceless. And I wore that thing every day for 5 years, because even though I messed up, every day I would look in the mirror and see that necklace. I'm like, I'm priceless. I can do this. And I would even write it on my skin, like, I'm priceless. I'm priceless. I'd write Bible verses. And even though I was messing up, I still remember that I was priceless. I was God's child. And, like, those are the biggest things. Like, remember who you are. Like, even if you're messing up, you're still God's child.
Doesn't change that. So good. Sarah, appreciate you so much. Love you. Thank you so much. You are priceless. We appreciate you a lot here. So, thanks.